Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Politics Relaxed. I'm very excited to say we're joined by Gina Miller. So, obviously, for those who don't know, you're the leader of the True and Fair Party. You're running to be an MP in Epsom and Ewell, and you're an activist who took the government to court twice and won, and obviously the star of Politics A Level. Yeah. uh, and that's kind of what I wanted to start on about your court case. And I watched your Tough Woman interview that you did, and it's striking to see the resilience that you showed in your first court case that came only a year after the murder of Joe Cox. You faced numerous death threats and abuse. I wonder, how did you manage to keep fighting the case despite all of that going on?
It's not easy, and I have to say I was a bit naive. I thought because I was standing up, and everyone remember during the Brexit campaign was talking about sovereignty and
Mm,
taking back control of Parliament. So I naively presumed that people would be understanding, and that's what I was doing, is protecting Parliament in both Miller one and two,
mm,
because Mrs May and Boris Johnson were both trying to, as it was proven, illegally close them down. So I couldn't understand the backlash, but it wasn't about the court cases so much. I soon learned it was about the fact that I was a woman of color.
mm.
How dare I? And it was being misrepresented by the press, which is one of the things I find really disturbing about our politics, is the role that the press play in it, because they're degrading and destroying trust by manipulating the messages of people, what they're trying to say, how it's presented. So it was really tough. I have to admit, Felix, there were days when I went home and cried, to be told that your children would be taken and killed, and, really the most horrendous threats on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Part of me was tough enough because I've been a campaigner for a very long time, for 34 years. But the rest of it was the personal bit doesn't always, just wash off you. And that's the same for all politicians. But we do know that a lot of female women who step up into the political arena, that's even with a small p, heads of companies or campaign groups or whatever, get a huge amount of abuse, and it's simply not right.
Yeah.
So I carry on, not because I'm fearless, but because I'm fearful of stepping away and those who with the loudest, most hateful voices winning.
Yeah. And you mentioned the media there. I mean, when I was doing my research, I was frankly shocked by what some of the things that were like directed at you were saying. You had like the headlines in the Mail. You had, Andrew Neil even on the BBC calling it a rich woman's hobby, which I just can't imagine it being said to a man if they were in that position. So, I just think it's like shocking, really, the amount of abuse and how much the media played into that.
It is, and a lot of it is because I think it goes down. I'm always looking at what are the causes of things going wrong, and I think a lot of it can be attributed to the fact that we've got media that are not independent,
Yeah.
that are actually biased in who they support. And they should be independent. They should not be foreignly owned. We should control foreign ownership of our media. I mean, we've got like sort of GB News now, and
Yeah.
these some of the American style, very biased channels coming here. We've got to ban foreign ownership of media. We've got to give the regulators, Ofcom, more powers to actually regulate I mean, IPSO, Ofcom, they're all very weak bodies. And
Mm.
so there has to be more legislation that gives them more powers, because our press are so precious in informing us in an unbiased way. And that's what they've got to get back to doing.
Mhm. And I wonder, you touched on and we touched on the personal experiences that you've had through the court case, but you've also had a much wider personal experience. I wonder how that plays into your politics.
I think one of the things that I say that in a way it was, of course, it was going to me stepping up to take on the government, because I've spent 34 years, as I said, being abused for the things I've called out. I mean, now I've been in the city since 1996, and I have been calling out a lot of the behaviour and rip-offs that led to the financial crisis in 2008, 9. And the hidden fees, lack of transparency, the mis-selling of products. When people work hard and put money away for either saving pensions or investments,
Mm.
these are hardworking people that should not be ripped off and should not be exposed. And I've been accused by the FT. I remember there was an article in the FT saying that I was a wrecking ball. I don't know how one woman becomes a wrecking ball of an entire institution, but a lot of this, Felix, is because a lot of these things in whatever sector you're in, financial services, the pharmaceutical industry, the justice system, politics, in any sector of society, the conflicts of interest run deep.
Mm,
And there aren't enough whistleblowing protection. So the other thing I propose as a true and fair party and as a candidate is to say we have to have robust whistleblowing processes and protections. Because when people know what's going on, we hear about it in the NHS all the time. Think about the poison blood scandal that we've just
mm,
had. These are open secrets in these industries, and yet people speak up and they're sacked or they're bullied, and the millions of then suffer. It is totally unfair. So
mm,
we have to have mechanisms where when things go wrong, they can be corrected. But not only that, that when there are reports and recommendations, that they're actually implemented. Because most of look at Windrush, it's taken so long or even Grenfell. We have a really dysfunctional society at the moment where unfairness and injustice
mm.
is not being properly tackled.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of brings me nicely on to the True and Fair Party. I wonder why, sorry, did you set up the party, and have you had any difficulties in setting up a political party?
Gosh, there are so many difficulties, even more barriers than I imagined originally.
Mm,
Because as a small political party, you don't get media coverage. You have to have at least 90 candidates before you'll get proper media coverage. You don't get funding. You don't get. You're hugely regulated, but you don't have the internal resources to, do all the accounting and legal. So there's lots of things. But also, we've been debanked 9 times because
mm,
banks don't want you as clients. Insurance companies don't want you. We couldn't get insurance. I'm really pleased that we have such an amazing youth under 25 engagement.
mm,
We have people applying, wanting to be interns or work placements, but you have to have special insurance to do that, and companies wouldn't offer it to us. So there are lots and lots of barriers to it. But the reasons I set up the True and Fair Party is that I've been very concerned about the lack of rigor in our what's called good chap model of government. It's
mm,
basically an open season for politicians, and they don't get held to account, and they can do what they want. And so, I've been talking about that since the Tony Blair and Iraq War back in 1997. But nobody really wanted to talk about it. It was like the most constitutional. It sounds boring, and people just shy away. But during Brexit and actually COVID, I do thank Boris Johnson for exposing how weak the system is,
yeah,
because he really showed how deep corruption runs, the self-interest, the one rule for them, one rule for us,
mm,
which has always been there. So what he did is he highlighted it, and I think that's created an opportunity for us to talk about strengthening it. And the True and Fair Party is in fact, as both insurgents, and what we're saying is the system is broken. The main status quo parties, turkeys for Christmas. Why would they want to change the system? But
mm,
we want to push and make sure and say, look, you are elected and paid for by the people. You should be responsible to the people.
mm,
And that means things like having a contract of employment. Just imagine if MPs had contracts of employment, it's like most people do when they go to work. They wouldn't be able to bully, harass, give money to their mates. The corruption, it would change almost overnight because there'd be a cultural shift.
mm,
So things like that, no second jobs, reforming the House of Lords. And when it comes to other policy areas, it's saying that, we want to start a debate and hopefully create transition to a new sort of politics that really puts well-being at the heart of our economy, that looks at longer term decision making, that creates solutions, that means that the next generations to come are not left with the burden of us just doing 3 to 5 year short-term policy making, which
mm.
means that you have to deal with all the effects of climate change, of the digital revolution, of what's going to happen with the growth of, massive unhealth in our population, aging in our population. These things are all there, but
Mm,
politicians don't talk about them with real honesty.
mm. I wonder, I mean, I'm interested in a lot of what you said there, but I'm particularly interested in the idea of trust. And I wonder, how do you kind of win people over to that? Because when a lot of people in their daily lives are going to have like these very immediate challenges of, for example, the cost of living crisis, all these very immediate things that they feel this is what politics has to address. How do you reshape that and then get people to vote based on long-term things like how the economy works, like trust in politics? How do you reshape voters to make sure that they're interested in both those things?
So it's really, really interesting knocking on the doorstep.
Mm,
People really get it. They do not trust that anybody cares for them. That's
yeah,
basically what they think. They don't think that anybody is caring for them. Cost of living crisis, the economy, what's happening in schools, special need provisions for parents, whatever the issue is, it all starts with, do you trust the people
mm,
to tell you the truth and to actually have the integrity and the honesty and the courage to go out there and try and fix it? And to me, the honest thing to say to the British public right now is that not to look back and say, to blame whatever happens. Political decisions in the past have led to problems in the future. What
mm,
we have to be honest about is that we cannot fix those problems overnight. That
mm,
what we need to have is almost a collective effort after as we had after the World War, where we're all going to have to come together because the problems are so entrenched
mm,
that we have to come together and start fixing them. And that's going to mean all of us rolling our sleeves up and doing that. And those sorts of conversation with people saying it's going to take time, but you have to trust we're going to do that. That's what people want to hear because they know that you cannot these promises. It's really interesting. Yesterday I was out canvassing for about 10 hours, and the majority of people on the doorstep saying, oh, we don't, the manifestos are like fairy tales, we don't trust
yeah,
anything they say in them because it's literally down to that. Oh, it doesn't care we don't care what they say anymore because we know they're not going to do it.
mm,
And that's terrible because the result is, I think, is we're going to see an astonishingly low turnout in this election. And that's not a functioning democracy then, because if you don't have trust, if you don't feel the people we elect are actually going to put you first, if you feel that what they're going to do is waste their money and just be short term, then people are not going to, people rightly will turn inwards and look after themselves and their families,
yeah,
but also, which is the other effect, which is what reform is doing and why they're doing so well, is that they're then so division and blame and othering. So it's then, it's not the politicians' fault. It's because we have so many migrants coming in. It's because we're building on the wrong things.
mm,
And actually, we don't have, for example, the NHS. 47% of the NHS people who work in the NHS are migrants, from a migrant background. So we wouldn't have an NHS functioning if we did that overnight. We
yeah,
don't have enough teachers in schools. We don't have enough. We have to control immigration, yes, but you have to do it in a sensible way. But that's not what some of the messaging is coming up, and it's like somebody, people are hurting, and there is, a particular level of politicians or breed of politicians who are making that hurt worse.
mm, yeah. Um, I want to ask about you talk about trust and better working institutions of government. What are the long-term goals for the party to try and get these reforms enacted, and what would success look like?
Well, in this election, short term, success would be quite historic if we got an MP, elected.
Yeah,
If I got elected, no small party has done that in the UK.
yeah,
So, people think Reform are doing really well. I go back to them, but actually they're 23 years old because
mm,
they were UKIP, then Brexit Party, then Reform. So they're not a new party.
yeah,
But no new party has ever had anybody elected. So it would be historic if that were to happen. But what that would mean is that to have, in effect, an independent voice in Parliament
mm,
calling them out on the floor of the House and
yeah,
not being, whipped or having collective responsibility. A strong voice, and that's what I would be if I were elected, to say,
mm,
right, you have to have. Why are you not bringing in proportional representation? Why are you not looking to bring in stricter rules and regulations? If not a contract of employment, then at least strengthen the Nolan principles and put those into law. At least we
mm,
start with some checks and balances. And if you cannot do that, Labour Party, because I think it is the Labour Party they're going to win,
yeah,
then you are not truly representing and putting people first, because you have to have checks and balances in how MPs and how people behave in the House. You are our leaders. You are our elected leaders. You owe us that.
mm,
So I would carry on doing that. The other thing is I would bang on about is on the environmentally is putting ecocide into law.
mm,
We cannot shy away from the fact that we have to make polluting the environment a criminal offence. And that's corporates, public bodies, everything. Other countries are doing it. The Biden administration is talking about it. The EU have already brought in a directive in March, which will put ecocide into law across all member states in 2 years' time. We are lagging so far behind. We're allowing companies to pollute our rivers, to denigrate our water systems, to produce food that's in a way that's hurting our land, building on greenbelt. We have to stop this now.
Mm. I wonder. You mentioned about climate change there. How else? What are some other pledges and policies you're putting forward for young people and to try and get young people to vote for your party?
Apart from that, it's also the student write-off loan scheme for anybody who's working in goes into public sectors, because we have a problem with recruiting and retention into our public sectors, NHS teachers, etc. So we are proposing a 50% write-off for student loans if you stay for 5 years, and if you stay for 7 years, a full 100% write-off of student loans. We're also suggesting that there is a completely different way of offering housing for first-time buyers, that we get rid of housing associations, and that stock is discounted by 25%, which then accounts for the deposit, so that young people can end up entering into the housing market.
Hmm.
Also at the top end, because this idea that there's a generational divide, actually young people have parents and grandparents have young people in their
Yeah.
families. It's about how do you work together. I don't believe in this generational divide, but you do need to incentivize over 75-year-olds to release property downsides and have those properties subdivided, so we solve our housing crisis. So reducing stamp duty for over 75s would trickle down and help young people all in housing.
Mm.
When it comes to mental health, which we know is a growing issue, it's having multi-service wellbeing hubs in high streets, so you don't have to wait. You need sometimes up to 2 years to see somebody in CAMHS or any sort of mental health support. If a young person is presenting in crises, they need to be seen as soon as possible. So it's a range of alternative therapies, music therapy, art therapies, talking therapies, early intervention therapies in high streets, in town centres for young people, but for everyone. But obviously, young people, more projects for young people in town centres, more things for them to do, bringing back things like boxing clubs or
Mm.
places you can go, because there is very little support in any form for young people in town centres. So we have a raft of different things to do. And then finally, I'd say is that how do there are too many young people dropping out or losing interest in education in the
Mm.
state sector. We know from all the schools at around 13, if you lose a young person by then, their interest in education, you've probably lost them
Yeah.
for good. So it's bringing in T levels at 13 to saying, if you're not going to go to university, then you should be taught maths, English subjects in a different way, in a much more practical way. So maths can then be about entrepreneurship. What does inflation mean? Practical maths
Mm.
in a way that helps you go into practical professions and much more skills and trade professions if you want to support from 13,
Yeah.
which I know a lot of young people are interested in doing.
Yeah. The next question is from one of our members, Taha, who's asked, considering the long-term impact of Brexit, what should the key focus areas for policy development to mitigate the challenges and leverage opportunities, particularly for young people?
That is a great question. There is so much that can be done quickly that's already there. So the first thing is that the EU have already offered that we open up again the deal and renegotiate travel for young people,
Mm.
travel visas for say 190 days a year. So definitely we should be. I mean, the UK government, present government, has rejected that offer. So
Mm.
we need to get around the table as soon as possible and discuss freedom of movement for young people. The Erasmus scheme, we need to go fully back into that. We should also go straight back and sign back into all the data agencies, so the environmental agencies, the justice agencies, the mental health agencies, all the pharmaceutical horizon, all of that research, all we should do straight away. And it's not difficult to do that.
Mm.
And then, very importantly, in the trade agreement that we signed, there was another agreement signed next to it, the Trading Cooperation Agreement. And in there, the EU did it for us. I think they didn't trust our politicians being better for you looking after us. I think they actually are looking after us better. So what they did is they put into that Trading Cooperation Agreement hundreds of renegotiation clauses that can be triggered in January or from January 2025.
Mm.
So I would urge the next government, and we've written papers, they're on our website, to straight away trigger those renegotiation clauses to reduce the damage.
Yeah.
But in the longer term, we have to start thinking about some sort of associated membership. But
Yeah.
again, that will take both parties being wanting to come around the table. And at the moment, the truth is that we are not trusted by the European Union to act in
Mm.
good faith.
I wonder, are you disappointed by parties like the Lib Dems, who in 2019 were so vocal about Brexit, now, and Labour as well, now kind of bringing it to the back of their manifestos and not really wanting to discuss it and not really putting rejoining the EU on the table?
I think it's so shameful. I mean, you've got Mr. Farage saying he's standing for Parliament because he can change his mind.
Mm.
Well, hang on a minute. If he can change his mind, why can't we have citizens assemblies or another vote, or be it in a referendum? Referenda I worry about, so I wouldn't say
Mm.
a referendum, but citizens assemblies or in somebody's manifesto that we actually have polling in young people, especially, but in the whole country, because bar a very small number of seats. I think there are only 3 seats in the country now in England. I
Mm.
can't speak for the other devolved nations, but in England, there are only 3 seats now where there's a majority for leaving.
Mm.
Why? I mean, why are they denying the will of the people today? I think it's absolutely shameful that we cannot. This idea that we had a vote, the biggest vote in our lifetime, so therefore it must stick to that. But
Mm.
then you could argue if we have an election and it was a landslide for in 2019 for the Tories, that was a vote, big. Why are we not sticking with that? It makes
Mm.
some nonsense to say because you've had a vote once, you must never revisit it.
Mm.
That's not how our democracy works. It's not how any democracy works. The only place that that stands is in dictatorships like North Korea and Russia. It is shameful that the main parties are not talking about the damage that Brexit has done to our country.
Mm. I want to move on. In prior elections, you've talked and advocated for tactical voting. You helped to set up Best for Britain, one of the tactical voting websites. And in Epsom and Ewell, I checked the other day because Best for Britain just put out their recommendations, and they're recommending people vote Labour in the seat to tactically get rid of the Tories. Why should people vote for you? And do you worry that by standing, you might risk the Tories winning?
No, and I have to say I'm very upset. I mean, and upset is the right word with a lot of the tactical voting websites, because when I started Best for Britain in 2017, it was the biggest tactical voting campaign, and we were very careful to be completely independent.
Mm.
The polls that I've looked at, I go out on the door every single day. This seat has been Conservative for 154 years.
Yeah.
It is not a Labour target seat in any way, shape, or form.
Mm.
People on doorstep do not talk about Labour. These tactical voting websites that are out at the moment are biased, and that the Best Written one is biased towards Labour. There are a few others that are biased towards Lib Dems. They're misleading people, and now they're conflicted and they're not independent. And the Stop the Tories, whatever it is, .vote. I'm very concerned that they are misleading people, because you have to look at, and some of it is intentional and some of it is not, because the way the tactical voting is working and they're using the methodology is they look at what happened in 2019, 2017, 2015, apply the national swing to every single seat. But if you do that, it doesn't work, because if you've got super safe seats, you can't apply the national swing
Mm.
and expect that to be the outcome. And that's why I would say the polls going all the way back, 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019, were all wrong. I mean, I go back to Best for Britain when I launched Best for Britain in 2017, Mrs. May was predicted a 100-seat majority.
Yeah.
And we very, very carefully targeted 26 seats, which we managed to turn 23, because we worked really hard, not just from doing what I call the air war of using the data and looking and applying that, but we went out in teams on the streets. We were doing real proper door-to-door canvassing and campaigning, and we could see which seats were going to turn. This seat in Epsom and Ewell is capable of being the Tories being overturned here for one very, very simple reason. The reason it has stayed a Tory seat for so long is the One Nation Tories, which make up about 80% of the vote here. They are saying this is not their Conservative Party. It is far too right-wing. Their party has left them. So they are saying they won't vote. Some of them will go to Labour or Lib Dems, but the majority are saying they won't vote.
Right.
I'm saying think about lending me your vote so that we can actually either split the vote. We will split the vote. I will split the vote, but split the Conservative vote so
Right.
that they don't win here. So either I win or somebody else does. And this is it's only going to be possible this time, I believe.
Mm. I, I wonder what sort of offer you're putting forward to those One Nation Tories, because are you basically saying that you are occupying that ground of where the One Nation Tories stood, or are you offering something different to that?
No, I'm offering something different. I'm saying that as an independent,
Mhm.
all I will be doing for the next 5 years, if you elect me, is not get involved or embroiled in Westminster politics and party politics, but be dedicated for 5 years to just looking after the community. That's my only job. I will literally just have one job because I won't have the power. And that's the problem with selecting a candidate from one of the main parties, is that all the parties, whatever happens, they are going to be infighting, fractional fighting, collective responsibility. You're being whipped to be told what you say or can't say. You do not have a truly free, independent voice to stand up for your community.
And is that the same reason you decided not to stand for one of the major parties and instead decided it was an independent campaign that you wanted to push for?
Yes, I mean, I was approached to take over, to seek, to discuss taking over Lib Dems when Vince
Mm.
Cable was stepping down, and I sort of saw the way they do policy. I actually was quite a senior member of the Labour Party in 2015. I drafted in their manifesto then the pension investment reforms in the party. Then I left when Mr. Corbyn joined. But so I have been part of politically active behind the
Mm.
scenes in all three main parties. I also worked on the modern day slavery bill, which Mrs. Bill and Mrs. May put forward.
Yeah.
So I'm not afraid to work cross party to achieve the outcomes that I think are better for people. But what I do worry about is that you're stymied your voice is stymied. You can't really honestly represent your local people because you're always whipped.
Mm. Yeah. Um, you mentioned earlier about the well-being economy, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. Could you kind of explain what that is and what you're proposing around that?
Yeah, so the well-being economy it's actually in a movement around the world. There are 21 countries have joined it, from Finland to Australia, Canada, New Zealand, countries who have all realized that our population has changed, demographics of our population's changed, and the threats we have coming down the line from climate change, particularly, and digital revolution in particular, are going to change the way we live, work, love, every part of our
Mm.
life. So, a well-being economy puts a lens of health and well-being over all policy areas.
Mm.
So, it's about putting that lens over and talking about, for example, housing, healthy housing. That is the standard of housing. How do is there damp in properties? Is there enough light? Is there proper drainage? Is there proper protection for environmental? Because we're going to see hotter weather than we've seen in the past, heating of the planets. Have we got water systems that are properly servicing houses? And then looking through the lens of work, if you have a population where we'll have more people not working because of the digital revolution and technology, what are those people going to do? How do we get them more involved in communities? And maybe bring in sometime in the future a living wage for everyone,
Mhm.
because if people are not working, how are you actually going, if they're not earning, how are they going to be able to live? Putting through on the economy, how do we bring more well-being economy into the high street? So more community services for people, respite services, care services, early interventions for health, but also from an economic point of view, is that if we're going to have people who are going to be owning massive, great big technology companies,
Mm.
how do they fairly pay taxes that then can go back to people in the community so they're looked after and fund our public services? So it's about a well-being and health lens across all policy areas.
Mm. I I wonder there would be some people that would listen to that and ask, is it a form of socialism or is this something different?
It is something different because all the data shows that health is so important, because without a healthy population, you don't have an innovative, productive, creative, resilient population. It's so important. Health is so
Mm.
important. Yet 80% of the contributing factors to our health are social factors. As I said, from how, education, housing, society, aspiration, access to health, access to work. 80%, that's an extraordinary number. And yet our economic model and social models concentrate on the 20%. So
Mm.
it's not a form of socialism, it's a form of realism that we need to transition to something where people actually will be looked after in a much fairer way. It's about fairness rather than socialism.
I guess people would, and I would wonder how do you fundamentally shift that economic model when you've got an economic like model in capitalism that is fundamentally directed towards profit? How do you shift that away? Like, how do you shift companies away from that primary model towards this idea of fairness and health?
So you have to look at legislation, and so I was part of a group back in the 90s. So I've been thinking about this for a long time. We were called the triple bottom liners, where companies had to report on people, profit, and planet.
Mm.
So for example, going back to my ecocide law, if companies had a legal requirement to protect the environment, to make sure that any damage they did, they have to put in place mitigating circumstances, mitigating measures. For example, big data companies use a massive amount of water and energy.
Yeah.
So they need to put in place mitigation or recycling. That means, for example, the heat and water that's used can then be recycled and go and used to help heating in local communities. We know some of them are already starting that. When it comes to people, that they have to be able to offer people the opportunity perhaps to have the first 2 years off work but still pay their NI so they can look after children for childcare. Or if they're having respite for looking after care, if they're caring for somewhere for young or elderly, that those companies can actually offer support to that. So it's how do corporates pursue a triple bottom line, and it's not something new. Because there's this chap called Adam Smith who wrote a book that everyone quotes about, The Invisible Hand. He
Yeah.
actually wrote a book at the same time. Some people call him a schizophrenic. He also talked about conscious capitalism.
Mm.
So that's what I'm talking about. How do we transform from aggressive capitalism to
Mm.
responsible capitalism? And
Mm.
we have to do that.
Mm.
This is not a nice to have. This is crucial for us to actually be able to survive in the future.
Mm. On that, thank you very much for giving time, especially twice. I really appreciate it. Thank you to you for watching the video. Please like and subscribe. I'm really excited. We've got so many interviews. We've got interviews with other candidates in this election and many others. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Felix, and have a wonderful holiday. I believe you're going off
Yeah, that's right. I'm off on Friday, so yeah.
on.